It was a typical bustling morning in downtown Cincinnati where the hum of traffic mingled with the sound of people rushing to their destinations. The weather was unusually warm for early spring, and Usha Vance, a well-known entrepreneur and philanthropist, had just stepped out of her black luxury car ready to attend a board meeting for her latest charity initiative. Her attire was sharp, a tailored suit that blended seamlessly with her confident demeanor. However, her day was about to take an unexpected turn. Usha had always been an advocate for social causes, using her platform to push for policy changes and to support those in need. But even for someone as committed to philanthropy as Usha, the everyday struggles of the homeless often seemed distant, something she read about in reports, not something she encountered in her daily life. That all changed on this particular day. As she walked briskly down the sidewalk, a small figure caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a child playing or perhaps asking for spare change. But as she got closer, the reality of the situation became clearer, and it froze her in her tracks. There, sitting on the cold concrete, was a young girl no older than 7 or 8. She was dirty, her clothes ragged and torn, and her hair unkempt. What struck Usha the most, however, was the sign the girl was holding. In bright, almost desperate handwriting, it read, "Help my mom." Usha felt an immediate pang of concern. She had grown accustomed to the sight of homeless people, but the idea of a child being in such a dire situation was something that hit her on a deeper level. The little girl, despite her age, had a stoic look on her face, as if she had been sitting there for a long time, hoping for someone, anyone, to notice her. The bustling crowd around her seemed oblivious. People hurried past, some glancing down with an uncomfortable look before continuing on their way. Usha, however, couldn't ignore the sight. She found herself rooted to the spot, staring at the girl who, despite her apparent fear and hunger, didn't utter a word. Without thinking, Usha knelt down in front of the girl, blocking out the noise of the city and the movement of people around her. Her heart clenched as she looked into the child's wide eyes, which seemed both innocent and weary. "Hi there," Usha said gently, her voice soft but firm. "What's your name?" The girl looked up at her with surprise, as if no one had asked her that question in a long time. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Sophie." Usha's heart ached even more. Sophie's face was smeared with dirt and her eyes were tired, but there was something about her resilience that spoke volumes. She wasn't crying, but the weight of her situation was evident in every small movement she made. "Where's your mom, Sophie?" Usha asked, glancing around, wondering if the girl's mother was somewhere nearby, possibly too ill or too scared to approach. The girl shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the sign she was holding. Her small hands trembled slightly as she gripped it. "She's sick," Sophie said, her voice trembling. "She can't move. I'm trying to get help for her." Usha was taken aback by the girl's calmness, especially considering the gravity of the situation. It was clear that Sophie had seen far more than a child her age should ever have to see. "Where is your mom now?" Usha asked, feeling the urgency rising in her chest. The child was so alone, so vulnerable. She couldn't just walk away. Sophie nodded toward a nearby alley, pointing with a shaky finger. "She's there. I couldn't leave her, so I came out to ask for help." Without hesitating, Usha stood up, her decision already made. "I'm going to help you, Sophie. Let's go get your mom." Sophie's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't believe someone was actually going to help. She clutched her sign tightly as she stood up, a little unsteady on her feet. Usha placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, leading her toward the alley that Sophie had pointed to. As they walked, Usha couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between Sophie's fragile frame and the harsh world around her. The noise of the city seemed so distant now, replaced by the muffled sounds of Sophie's footsteps. Usha was filled with an overwhelming sense of urgency. She didn't know what she would find in the alley, but she knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary situation. This was a moment that would change her life and the lives of many others, forever. The alley was narrow, littered with discarded boxes, broken bottles, and an overwhelming scent of neglect. Usha's heart pounded in her chest as she followed Sophie, who walked carefully in front of her, each step tentative. The farther they went into the alley, the more Usha's concern deepened. It was a place that no child should ever have to navigate, a place where the struggles of life were laid bare in their rawest form. Sophie stopped in front of a dilapidated door, which was slightly ajar. Her small hands trembled as she reached out to knock on it, but before she could, the door creaked open slowly. Inside, Usha could hear a faint rustling sound followed by a soft cough. Mom? Sophie called out hesitantly. The door swung open wider, and a woman appeared in the dim light. She was sitting on a makeshift bed propped up by a stack of old pillows. Her face was pale, and she looked exhausted, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. The woman's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Sophie's voice, and for a moment she just stared at her daughter, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Sophie, you shouldn't be out there," the woman whispered, her voice weak and hoarse. "You should have stayed inside." "I couldn't, Mom," Sophie replied softly. "I had to help you. I had to ask for help." Usha's breath hitched as she observed the woman. She had the appearance of someone who had once been vibrant, but life's harsh realities had clearly worn her down. The woman's skin was pale, her clothes ragged, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The frailty of her situation was painfully evident. "Hi," Usha said gently, stepping into the room and offering a warm smile, though her heart ached for what she was witnessing. "I'm Usha. I'm here to help." The woman's gaze shifted to Usha, confusion and disbelief written across her face. She glanced between Usha and Sophie, then back to Usha as if she couldn't quite comprehend the situation. "You want to help?" the woman asked hoarsely. "Why would you want to help us?" Usha knelt down beside the woman, trying to ease the tension in the room. "Because no one should have to live like this. I can't turn my back on a child in need, and I'm certainly not going to ignore a mother who's doing everything she can to survive." "What's your name?" The woman hesitated before replying, her voice barely audible. "I'm Rachel, and this is my daughter, Sophie." "Rachel, I'm so sorry you're going through this," Usha said softly. "How long have you been in this situation?" Rachel's eyes filled with unshed tears, and she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "It's been months, maybe longer. Sophie and I used to have a home, but then things got bad. My health started failing, and I couldn't keep a job. We lost everything." She glanced at Sophie, who was standing quietly by Usha's side, looking up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. "I didn't want Sophie to see me like this. I didn't want her to know how much I failed her." Usha felt her heart shatter for Rachel. The weight of her words was not just in the loss of material things, but in the crushing guilt of not being able to protect her child from the harshness of the world. Usha could see the emotional toll this situation had taken on both of them. "No one here has failed anyone," Usha said, her voice firm but compassionate. "You are doing your best, and that's more than enough. But I can help you both. I can get you the medical care, the shelter, and the support you need." Rachel shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "You don't understand. I don't want to be a charity case. I don't want to be another statistic. But I don't know where else to turn." Usha placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's arm. "I don't see you as a charity case. I see a mother who is fighting for her child. That's something worth supporting. There are resources available. I know people who can help. But the first step is to take that hand. Let me help you." Rachel looked down at Sophie, who was now holding Usha's hand, silently squeezing it. It was as if Sophie, despite her young age, had already made up her mind. She trusted this stranger, this woman who had come into their lives with nothing but compassion. "I don't know what to say," Rachel whispered. "Thank you." Usha smiled warmly, standing up to her full height. "No thanks needed. Let's focus on getting you the care and support you deserve. We'll figure this out together." Usha could see the flicker of hope in Rachel's eyes, a spark that hadn't been there moments ago. It was the same look that Sophie had when she first spoke to her, a glimmer of belief that perhaps things could be different. And that was all Usha needed to keep moving forward. But there was something else Usha couldn't ignore, the hidden pain in Rachel's eyes. It wasn't just physical illness that had brought them here. There was something deeper, something that Usha was determined to uncover. She wasn't just going to help them survive, she was going to help them thrive again. As Usha stepped out of the room to make some phone calls to her team and begin organizing the support Rachel and Sophie desperately needed, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story was just beginning. Usha's mind raced as she made her way to the car, Sophie and Rachel's faces lingering in her thoughts. The next steps were clear in her mind: medical care, shelter, food, and safety. But there was something more she needed to uncover about Rachel's situation. Something that could help her beyond just physical recovery. But before she could do that, she needed to act quickly to get Rachel the immediate help she needed. As Usha sat in the back seat of her car, she made several calls to her trusted team members, doctors, social workers, and charity organizers. By the time she arrived at the nearest medical center, arrangements had already been made for an emergency consultation for Rachel. Sophie, who had been so quiet all this time, sat next to Usha in the back seat, clutching her worn-out sign as if it were a lifeline. "Sophie, how are you feeling?" Usha asked, her voice soft but concerned. Sophie turned her head slowly, looking up at Usha with big, curious eyes. "I'm okay," she said. "I just want my mom to get better." Usha smiled gently, her heart swelling with admiration for this brave little girl. "I know you do, and we're going to make sure she gets all the help she needs. You're doing the right thing by helping her." Sophie nodded, the seriousness of her gaze never leaving Usha's face. "I know, but I also want to make sure we have a home again. I want a bed that's not on the floor." Usha felt a lump form in her throat. The innocence in Sophie's words was like a slap in the face to the injustice of their circumstances. No child should ever have to hope for something as basic as a bed. "You will, Sophie," Usha said with a confidence she didn't quite feel. "I promise you, we'll find you a place that's safe. You'll have a bed, food, and everything else you need. It's going to be okay." Sophie seemed to find comfort in her words, her shoulders relaxing slightly as the car pulled into the medical center. A nurse was already waiting at the entrance, prepared to escort Rachel into the clinic for her checkup. As Rachel limped toward the door with Sophie by her side, Usha could see the relief in Rachel's eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't have to face the world alone. After Rachel and Sophie were settled in the clinic, Usha took a moment to step outside and make another phone call. This time, it was to a private investigator she'd worked with in the past. Someone who could dig into Rachel's background, the source of her hardships, and the truth behind their sudden descent into homelessness. As she hung up, Usha felt an unfamiliar sense of urgency. There was more to the story than met the eye. Rachel had spoken about losing her job and health, but something about the way she had looked at Sophie earlier, something unspoken, told Usha there were deeper layers of pain and trauma yet to be revealed. Usha knew that the first step toward healing was getting Rachel and Sophie to safety, but the road ahead was not going to be easy. There were layers of systems to navigate, both medical and social, and there was the lingering question of what had caused Rachel's situation in the first place. A few hours later, Usha returned to the clinic to find Rachel resting in a clean bed and 4 drip slowly replenishing her energy. Sophie was sitting at her side, drawing on a piece of scrap paper she'd found, the concentration on her face a striking contrast to her earlier anxiety. Usha sat down beside them, her gaze soft as she looked at both of them. "How are you feeling?" she asked Rachel, her voice calm but direct. Rachel smiled faintly. "Better. The doctors say I'll need a few days of rest, but I'll be okay. Thank you for all of this." "It's the least I can do," Usha replied. "I'll keep checking in, but for now just focus on resting and getting your strength back. We'll take care of everything else." But Rachel's expression shifted. It was almost imperceptible, but Usha noticed it, the flash of something guarded, as if Rachel was holding something back. "I don't know how to say this," Rachel began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but this isn't just about me being sick. It's about everything that happened before that. I don't know if I can talk about it, but..." Usha's heart raced as she saw the pain and fear rising in Rachel's eyes. This was the moment when the real story, the truth behind their circumstances, was finally going to come to light. "I don't want to push you to talk before you're ready," Usha said gently. "But if you ever do decide you're ready, I'm here to listen. You don't have to go through this alone." Rachel looked at Usha for a long moment, then slowly nodded. There was still a wariness in her eyes, but there was also a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust this woman. For the rest of the day, Usha made sure Rachel and Sophie had everything they needed: comfort, warmth, and security. But the gnawing feeling that there was more to this story wouldn't leave Usha. She couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened to Rachel was not just a matter of bad luck, it was something deeper, something far more complex. And Usha was determined to find out what it was. The following day, Usha returned to the clinic to check on Rachel and Sophie. The mood in the room had shifted slightly. Rachel seemed more at ease, though still physically fragile. Sophie was once again drawing, her concentration intense as she scribbled lines across the paper with quick, fluid strokes. Her usual nervousness was gone, replaced by the calm of knowing that she and her mother were safe for the moment. Usha pulled up a chair next to Rachel's bed. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft hum of medical equipment in the background. She leaned forward, her voice low and gentle. "How are you feeling today, Rachel?" Usha asked, her eyes scanning Rachel's face for any signs of lingering pain or distress. Rachel gave a small, strained smile. "Better. The doctor said I can start some light physical therapy to get my strength back. It's not going to be quick, but I'll make it. Usha nodded, but the question she was really interested in lingered. She hesitated before speaking, aware that it could be a turning point in their relationship, but also knowing it was necessary to truly help Rachel and Sophie. Rachel, you've been so strong, but I have to ask. You mentioned earlier that it wasn't just your health that caused all of this. If you ever feel ready to talk about it, I want you to know that you're not alone. I can help. Rachel's eyes immediately darkened at the mention of the past. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the hospital sheets. Sophie, who had been absorbed in her drawing, looked up at her mother, sensing the change in the atmosphere. She set her crayon down carefully and climbed into the bed next to Rachel, placing a tiny hand on her mother's arm. Rachel's voice came out in a whisper, barely audible. I didn't want Sophie to know. I've been trying to protect her. But the truth is, things weren't always like this. We used to have a good life, a nice house, a steady income. But that all changed when my ex-husband came back into our lives. Usha's heart sank. She could feel the tension in the room grow, the air thick with the weight of Rachel's words. She leaned in closer, her tone encouraging but patient. Your ex-husband? Usha asked softly. Rachel nodded, her eyes glazed over as she looked at the ceiling, as if searching for the words that had been buried for so long. He came back after years of being absent. At first, I thought maybe he'd changed, maybe he'd learned from his mistakes. But I was wrong, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. He started drinking again, and when he drank, he got violent. Not just with me, but with Sophie too. He'd come home late, slamming doors, yelling at us. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't go to the police because I was afraid of what he might do. And I couldn't leave because I had nowhere to go. Rachel paused, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the memories seemed to flood back, overwhelming her. She looked down at Sophie, who had fallen asleep with her head resting against Rachel's arm. Usha sat in stunned silence, absorbing Rachel's story. The pain in Rachel's eyes was unbearable. This wasn't just a story of financial hardship. It was a story of abuse, of a woman who had tried to protect her child while trapped in a cycle of fear and helplessness. When things got too bad, Rachel continued, her voice trembling, I tried to leave. But he found us. And that's when we ended up on the streets. The eviction notices, the constant moving from place to place. I couldn't keep Sophie safe anymore. I couldn't protect her from him. And that's why we've been out here. We've been hiding. Hiding from him. And hiding from the world. Usha's eyes filled with tears. It was clear now that Rachel's battle hadn't just been against poverty, it had been a fight for survival, a fight to protect Sophie from the violence of her past. And in her desperation, she had fallen through the cracks of the system, unable to get the help she so desperately needed. I'm so sorry, Rachel, Usha said, her voice thick with emotion. You should never have had to go through this. No one should. Rachel shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. I don't even know where to start. I've made so many mistakes. I thought I could handle it, that I could fix things on my own. But I couldn't. I'm just a failure. Usha's heart broke for Rachel. The shame and guilt that Rachel felt were palpable, but Usha knew that those emotions had no place here. The only thing that mattered now was what could be done to help Rachel heal and rebuild her life. You're not a failure, Rachel, Usha said firmly. You've been fighting for your daughter. And that makes you one of the strongest people I know. But you don't have to fight alone anymore. I'm going to help you get the support you need. We're going to make sure you and Sophie are safe. No more hiding. No more fear. Rachel wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. For the first time since Usha had met her, she seemed to let down her guard, if only just a little. Usha continued, her voice filled with resolve. I'll help you get a restraining order against him, and I'll make sure that Sophie and you have a safe place to stay. We'll connect you with the right resources, social services, housing assistance, legal aid. And I won't stop until you both have a fresh start. Rachel finally met Usha's gaze, her eyes searching as if trying to decide whether to believe her. I don't know what to say, Rachel whispered. Thank you for not giving up on us. You never had to ask for help, Rachel. You just needed someone to listen, Usha replied, her voice steady with conviction. And I'm here, always. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Usha worked tirelessly to ensure that Rachel and Sophie had the support they needed to start their journey to recovery. The local social services had mobilized quickly, connecting Rachel with a domestic violence shelter where she and Sophie could stay safely away from her abusive ex-husband. Usha had also coordinated with a legal team to help Rachel file a restraining order against him, ensuring that he could no longer harass or threaten them. Sophie, now feeling the warmth and safety of a stable environment, slowly began to open up. She smiled more often, and the weight she had carried for so long seemed to lift from her shoulders. She had even started drawing again, filling pages with images of sunshine, flowers, and animals, things that every child should be free to imagine without fear. Rachel, too, was beginning to heal, though her journey was far from over. She was attending therapy sessions to work through the trauma she had endured, and Usha made sure she had access to every resource available to help her regain control of her life. One afternoon, as Usha sat with Rachel and Sophie in their new temporary housing, Rachel spoke with a determination Usha hadn't seen before. "I never thought this day would come," Rachel said, looking out the window. The room was small, but it was clean and comfortable, with a bed for both her and Sophie. "I didn't think I would ever feel safe again, that I could live a life that wasn't controlled by fear." Usha sat beside her, offering a quiet smile. "It's the beginning of a new chapter. You don't have to do it alone anymore, Rachel. You've got a team behind you now." Rachel nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you, Usha. You didn't just help us find safety. You gave us hope. You showed me that there are people who care. I don't think I could have made it without you." Usha's heart swelled with emotion, but she kept her composure. This was the moment she had been working for, the moment when someone like Rachel, someone who had suffered in silence for far too long, could finally breathe easy again. But Usha knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and the painful process of rebuilding a life from the ashes of the past. As the days went by, Usha continued to check in on Rachel and Sophie. She arranged for Sophie to attend school again, and though the trauma of the past still lingered, Sophie was eager to return to a semblance of normality. She quickly made friends at school, and her teachers were sympathetic to her situation, offering her additional support to help her catch up with the rest of her class. Rachel, meanwhile, was working hard to rebuild her career. With the help of Usha's connections, she secured a part-time job at a local cafe, nothing glamorous, but it was a start. Every day, she showed up with a determination to create a new life for herself and Sophie. It was a moment of victory for both women, a moment that signified the triumph of hope over despair, of survival over the deepest of hardships. Usha visited Rachel's new apartment the following week. It was small, a modest one-bedroom unit with second-hand furniture and walls still bare, but it was theirs. Sophie ran to greet her, throwing her arms around Usha's waist in a tight hug. Look, Usha!" Sophie exclaimed, pulling Usha into the small living room where Rachel was sitting, her face lit up with pride. "We have our own place now." Usha smiled and hugged Sophie tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. This is your new home." Rachel joined them in the living room, her eyes shining with a sense of accomplishment. "It's not much, but it's a start. I'm finally able to take control of my life again. I'm learning that I don't have to let my past define me. And I'll do everything I can to make sure Sophie grows up safe and loved." Usha nodded, knowing that the true healing had begun. The journey wasn't over, but Rachel and Sophie had come a long way. They had reclaimed their lives from the darkness that once threatened to consume them, and now they were standing tall, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. As Usha prepared to leave, she placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "I'm always here for you, Rachel. If you ever need anything, no matter how big or small, you know where to find me." Rachel smiled, her voice steady and strong. "Thank you, Usha. You've been a lifeline. You've shown me that it's never too late to start over." With that, Usha stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, her heart full of hope. She had made a difference in the lives of two people who had once felt invisible, who had once believed they were beyond saving. But now, they were free, and the future was theirs to shape. And as Usha walked away, she knew one thing for certain: no act of kindness, no matter how small, was ever wasted. For in helping others, she had found her own purpose, and that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all.